Okay, thank you very much. And at the end, just leave it like that. You can leave it. Okay, we'll switch it off. Okay, thank you.
But here it's more like
Yes. Is it the first one? Okay. Yes. Yeah, no problem. Yeah. No. Okay. Can we use a microphone too? Yeah, I think this would be better.
this is
How do I turn it off? Off and then on.
on
Yeah.
and off.
So this is just easy to use.
Uh-huh.
So-
I think we're gonna go with the microphone. I'm gonna deal with it. But okay, I'll take this as well. So, wanna give it a try? I'm not throwing this, to be honest.
So you throw.
I'll give it a microphone.
There's a microphone here.
And 2 days ago, it happened. Somebody threw the mic from the behind to the front, so it hit some lady's back. So it was
Catch box.
So
Now you should close your mouth.
Is this a way to turn this off? Well,
it is
Okay.
it is always on.
it's always on.
So technician should off with the control. My last question is. Visit this session. If it is the case, I can.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Xavier Labandeira. I'm director of FSR Climate, one of the co-organizers of this side event. The title of the side event is Delivering the EU Contribution under the Paris Agreement, the implementation of the 2030 Climate and Energy Framework, and is co-organized by with DG Climate from the European Commission. So the side event will be organized in two parts. First, we'll have a keynote by Artur Runge-Metzger. I will present him in a moment. And then we'll have a panel. We'll have a panel with the members here in the table. I will ask them a few questions. They know the questions in advance, and each question, we have 4 questions, will be directed to them, and then we'll have some debate, internal debate here, and we'll try to keep some time for the audience at the end to do questions, to make questions both to Artur and the rest of the panelists. So before starting with Artur, let me tell you what we do in Florence. Florence is the only pan-European university. It's a European institution focused on social sciences. And we have a research center on climate issues, mainly devoted to the study of European climate policy. At the moment, we have a live project on the EU ETS, and we are very interested, of course, in the reform of the system and also in overall European climate policy. We are economists, and we are trying to do economic analysis of European climate policies. That's why we are very interested in this side event, and what we are very happy to have it together with DG Climate. Let me introduce now to Artur Runge-Metzger. Artur is originally an academic, like us in Florence. He started his professional career at the University of Göttingen in Germany in 1985 as a natural resource economist and development economist, also agricultural economist. And he joined afterwards the European Commission in 1993. And I think that his first position was quite important for what he would do afterwards. He was responsible for the bilateral cooperation on agricultural policies, rural development, and the environment between the EC and Zimbabwe. He was actually in the delegation in Harare. Returned to Europe, he was collaborating in the late 90s with DG Development and DG Environment, and from 2003 he is dealing with climate issues. He was first head of unit, and then since 2009 director focusing on international and domestic climate strategy. Sorry. His current position is recent, from the beginning of 2016, as Director of Climate Strategy, Governance and Emissions from Non-Trading Sectors at DG Climate. So, Artur, the floor is yours. I think that you have a presentation which will inform us as how the EU wants to implement Paris and deliver our commitments there.
No, I think you said that I took my new position on the 1st of January 2016, and that, as you remember, was 2 weeks after Paris, when it became clear that, okay, Paris is done, now let's get on with the implementation of Paris, because there is a lot of work that is to be done. And in Paris, Europe, as you know, European Union promised that we would reduce our emissions by at least 40% by the year 2030 compared to 1990. So what I want to do is to give a little overview on where we stand at the present point in time. What are the most important pieces of legislation that we have put into the stream, into the co-legislation. So we are at the present point in time at the level of legislative proposals that are being negotiated by the Council and the Parliament, and also what we do in terms of the enabling environment, because legislation alone, we believe, is not going to do the trick. And of course, if I wanted to go into all the details, I would have you here until tomorrow morning. So this is going to be a tour de paysage, and it's going to go very fast. And hopefully we can go a little deeper then later on. So where do we stand in terms of emissions? And I think this is a graph which we are renewing every year, and every year it points into the same direction. The GDP in Europe is growing. In the year 2015, plus 50% compared to the year 1990. At the same time, greenhouse gas emissions are going down. So we believe that we are decoupling our economy in terms of greenhouse gas emissions from economic growth. And the plan is that this is going to continue also into the future. So the plan is that GDP is going to grow until 2030 and emissions are going to go down by minus 40% at least. We already have our 2020 targets, which are enshrined in the Doha Amendment, and now 2030 is the time frame for the Paris Agreement. What is enshrined in the Paris Agreement is the 40%, but we have additional targets in Europe in order to be able to accomplish the 40%. One is on renewable energy, at least 27%. One is on energy efficiency. The proposal is 30% improvement. And then also interconnection, which is for a group of countries that is as big as the European Union, very important to make sure that you have a single energy market. You can see here with our 2020 current EU climate policy, you see the red line, our emissions would continue to go down until the year 2050, but only by minus 40%. So it is important to come with new targets, with a new set of objectives, which then gets us along the line of what you see the power sector and down to 80% in the year 2050. So that is what we are going to accomplish with the current new milestone for the year 2030. This gives you an overview on what are the different pieces of legislation that really govern the greenhouse gases. And it's only 3 pieces of legislation. One is the European Union emissions trading system. That covers a little more than 40% of the European Union's emissions. And their emissions need to go down by minus 43% compared to the year 2005 by 2030. And then we have the sectors outside the ETS, so outside the emissions trading system. And that is households, that is agriculture, that is road transport, and that is also waste and buildings. And here we need to accomplish a minus 30% by the year 2030. Why are these numbers different? On one side, minus 43, on the other side, minus 30%. That is because the mitigation potential in the trading sectors is still larger if you compare it at the same price. So the cost-efficient reduction potential in the ETS, in the power sector, in the industrial sectors is still larger compared to what can happen under the effort-sharing regulation. And then the third pillar of this whole construct is land use change and forestry. And it is for the first time that we are going to integrate that into the overall architecture. What is also new compared to the current status is that we are starting to establish linkages between the pillars. And you see that little small arrow, yellow arrow that goes from the ETS to the effort sharing. So there's a number of member states that will be able to use that flexibility. The reason, again, is very simple. If you observe the prices in the ETS market at the moment, somewhere around 5 euros per ton of carbon dioxide, there are some member states, if they want to reduce their emissions in the building sector or in the transport sector, that would be much, much, much more expensive. So therefore, they have said we would like to have a little more flexibility. But that also depends on each of the situations of member states. And in the same way, for the first time, we are proposing to have a link between land use change and forestry and the effort sharing. And the reason, again, is that there's a number of member states who have very high emissions from agriculture non-CO2. And as you know, this is methane, this is nitrous oxide, and that is not so easy to reduce. So what is being given here is some more flexibility for farmers to say, no, we can not only reduce emissions of our cows and our fertilization of the soils, but we can also improve the carbon stock in the soils. And in that way, we also can contribute to the battle against climate change. So that is the overall policy structure. If you look at the individual pieces of legislation, here you have the emissions trading system. You will see that the cap under the emissions trading system is going to be lowered. The proposal is minus 2.2%. This is still a figure that is being discussed in the Council and the Parliament. There's also the question about the distribution between auctioning and free allocation. Auctioning we do for the power sector. Free allocation we do for a part of the emissions from the industrial sectors. The reason for that is very simple. Many of our industry is exposed to international competitive pressures. In order to take off that pressure and not make industry move and emissions just move around the world, free allocation is going to safeguard for that kind of movement. And then we have, and that you see at the bottom there, innovation support. So we also recycle part of the revenue at the level of the EU to modernize our economies and also to support research and technology innovation. So there's a modernization fund and an innovation fund that is being planned. So these are, I think, some key elements of the emissions trading system. If you now look at the sectors outside the ETS, the principle there of distributing targets is, first of all, these is, according to subsidiarity, the responsibility of member states. So you will see member states' targets for the buildings, the transport, the agricultural sector, and these targets are different from one member state to the other. And the distribution is based on the capacity, the capability of each of the member states to modernize the different sectors. So you will see here on the right-hand side, Bulgaria, which has a target of 0%. And on the left-hand side, you see, is it correct? Yes, on the left-hand side, you see Luxembourg, which has a target of minus 40%. Luxembourg is the richest country per capita. Bulgaria is the poorest country. And all the other member states are lined up between 0% and minus 40%. And really, fairness is the central theme of distributing the targets here. But on top of that, if you then want to achieve cost efficiency over all these sectors, you need to have flexibility. And one of the flexibilities that is provided is that if you would reduce more emissions in, say, Bulgaria or Romania, that you can have credits in Luxembourg for that in order to accomplish your target. So you have a little kind of emissions trading with 28 member states participating in that, also on this side, to make sure that you come, or you are able to get to a cost-efficient solution. We have added to these flexibilities that already exist today, two more flexibilities which are already mentioned. That was the yellow arrow from the ETS to the ESR, and the other side from the LULUCF to the effort sharing. And that is also distributed in different ways. And you can see it here, the blue and the dark blue and the dark green at the end shows you what flexibility has been given to different member states. And that very much depends on where are the member states on the marginal abatement cost curve. So if you are very far on the right-hand side, you have more flexibility. If you are on far to the left-hand side, so your marginal abatement cost is smaller, then you require less flexibility. So these are the principles that have been put forward in the proposal. I don't want to say a lot about land use. When we talk about land use here, we mainly talk about the CO2 emissions, the carbon dioxide emissions. So that is really what is in the plant stock, what is the emissions from decomposition of organic material that is being counted here. And the rule that is established here is what we call the no debits rule. So member states should not incur debits from that. And in that way, the whole equation makes sense. So you have, on one hand, the minus 43%, you have the minus 30%, plus the no debits, that will get you to at least minus 40% overall. So that is the simple arithmetics that is behind these three pieces of legislation. Now I come to the kind of the second layer of legislation, and this is particularly important for the, oops, now it's frozen. Oh no, is it the wrong? Ah, no, it is. Good. That is particularly important for the energy sector, where, as you know, the European electricity market is still a market that is relatively fragmented, is not a real single market. We have been making big strides toward a single market, but kind of there is a lot of improvement that is necessary to get the internal electricity market working to the benefit of all the consumers, so that consumers at the end of the day are going to pay a price that is pretty similar from one country to the other. The same is for energy efficiency, where we need a second layer of legislation. That same is true for the renewables, and then to have an overall governance system in order to make sure that we are accomplishing particularly the targets on energy efficiency and renewables, which are not going to be broken down to the member state level, but that we only have at the level of the EU. So that is something where we need to go to. On the renewables, I don't want to go into depth on that. I think one of the challenges is how can we get a cost-efficient support system in place? And of course, if we talk about support today, is a very different story than from 20 years ago. Today, we see prices for renewable energy going down very dramatically. If you look at the last tenders that have been put forward, kind of some people say we are already at cost parity with the production of electricity from fossil sources. So in terms of the support system that you require, you can do that differently today than you were doing it 20 years ago. And that, again, at the end of the day, should be to the benefit of the consumer. On energy efficiency, the way we count energy efficiency is in terms of total energy demand at the end of the day. So if we say minus 30%, and that is calculated against a business as usual. So overall, what we will see is energy demand going down in the coming decade, and that is how we do energy efficiency. There's many pieces to energy efficiency. We talk here about, in the transport sector, CO2 and car emissions. We talk about standards for energy efficiency, so eco-design directive. So again, is quite a number of pieces of legislation that take this matter forward. And some of them are mentioned here in terms of the details. Efficient cars are spreading. At the moment, we have targets until the year 2021. We are presently working on proposals that should come out during the course of this year and mid next year for cars, vans, and then also trucks and buses in the coming year. On transport, it's not only the efficiency of the cars, it's also the fuels. So part of the renewable electricity energy directive, the proposal, we have proposals on low emission fuels. On one hand, the challenge is to kind of reduce the pressure on the traditional biofuels, but on the other hand, to bring in the kind of what some people call second generation or advanced biofuels. So we have two separate targets that are proposed there. The one for the good biofuels, if you want, or the good low emission fuels going up, and the other one going down slowly until the year 2030. Then we have the whole story around the F-gases. That's very much related to the Kigali Amendment under the Monroe Protocol. So that is also something we are already regulating. So that is not at the stage of the proposal. That is something that is already implemented. And then I want to spend a little time on the enabling environment, because while we are great believers in the regulatory framework, and that is going to take us forward, we need to also look at the wider picture in terms of how is the energy and the climate action we are doing sitting in the wider context. Because what we want to generate in Europe is economic growth and also jobs. And if you look at the European economy, we have been going through quite a recession over the last decade, and there is still a number of member states struggling at the present point in time, and that is something we need to address. And if you want to really be successful on energy and climate, you also need to look, for instance, at the skills agenda. Renovating houses is not something we learn from 12 o'clock until noon. It's something that really requires skills, and that is something that needs to be trained. So there we support in order to make sure that we're not only setting steep targets on energy efficiency, but we also support the ways this is going to be delivered. And the same is true for investments in many areas where we have investment programs trying to support, for instance, the alternative fuel infrastructure, to roll it out so that kind of people will trust that with an electric car they can really move and go on holidays and not just ride around in the streets of a city. And the same, again, is also true for the capital markets, where we talk about green finance, where we talk about green bonds. How green are these bonds? At the moment, they come in all shades of light green to maybe dark green brown. And that is something we are looking at the moment, whether it would be helpful to also regulate in that particular area. And the same is true in terms of disclosure on risks that are related to your assets, how much you have, for instance, in the fossil fuel economy. So it's a much wider picture you need to look at when you talk about mainstreaming climate and getting really forward on climate and energy. In the beginning, you can do it in a simple way. The further you go, the more complex it becomes. In terms of enabling environment, we also had a look at our EU budget, and we have and I think that is pretty unique around the world. We have a spending target for climate-related expenditure, which is at least 20% until the year 2020. In research and innovation, it is 35% that should be spent of the European Union budget. And if you look at one particular investment fund that is going to go into the future, 40% of that should be related to climate and energy in the coming years. So in that way, we also stimulate direct investment to make sure that the transformation, the transition, the modernization of the European economy is really going to happen. And I spoke about some of the revenue from the ETS, which we use also to recycle it to those industries that are paying for these allowances, so into industry and also the energy sector for new energy technologies and for new, cleaner industrial processes. Finally, of course, there's also our commitments vis-à-vis the developing countries. In order to sum it up, and okay, this is pour mémoire, we are not only dealing with mitigation, we know that adaptation is a challenge. One of the tasks in the coming year is going to be to update our adaptation strategy at the EU level. Member states, all of them in the meantime have their own national strategies, which are really getting into the detail. So that is also an aspect we are not forgetting. Sometimes we are accused of only looking at mitigation. So that is not true. The challenge in Europe is there when it comes to adaptation as well. Outlook and a little summary at the end. What do we want to do with the European economy is really to make it the most productive and most efficient economy worldwide. If you look where we are at the present point in time, we are already up at the front end. But if you look 15 years ahead, we would hope that our cutting edge is becoming an ever more cutting edge. And I think that is important for us, not only in terms of the fight against climate change. If you look at the wider sustainability issues that we are going to face with much larger pressures on natural resources, becoming more productive and becoming more efficient is the only way we will be able to stay competitive in Europe. And I think we are convinced about that. And with that, I think I should leave it to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Artur. Very comprehensive overview of the European climate policy. I think it was clear that we are in front of strong commitments, especially if we think in 2050, and that we have a complex and sophisticated mix of policies. So it is important, and I would like this to be discussed by the panel, to draw lessons on the application of these policies that we already have, and also to provide suggestions on how to improve things that could be improved. This is not only good for us as Europeans, but also good for the rest of the world, because it is expected that many other countries implement packages that are similar to this one. So I would like to have some discussions on this in the panel. So let me introduce the panelists. From the first on my left is Eva Plocek. She is Masters in Politics and European Studies at Palacký University, Czech Republic.
Yes.
And she was working for the Ministry of Environment there in the Czech Republic for 6 years after she graduated. And after that, and currently she's there, she is the Environment Climate Attaché at the permanent representation of the Czech Republic to the European Union. And with that background, I think you can provide a lot of insights on the member state, European institutions, interactions in this area where you are particularly working. Next one is Henning Hader. He's a Master on Intelligence and International Security from King's College London. And after doing this master's, he was working for a few years in the field of international security and foreign policy. And in the last 6 years, he has been advisor to Euroelectric, dealing with topics related to energy efficiency, decarbonization, and European emissions trading. Euroelectric is an association of European utilities. And finally, Claudio Marcantonini. He's my colleague at Florence, at the Florence School of Regulation. He's the deputy director there. He's a PhD in physics from MIT, also graduated from physics at the University of Perugia, Italy. And after doing his PhD, he was working in the MIT for a few months, dealing on topics already related on electricity and climate issues. And afterwards, he was collaborating with the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency. And at the moment, he's quite an expert on the EU ETS. He's doing his work there, and some of the questions are obviously related to this important instrument within European mitigation policies. So let me, after presenting let me present the first of the questions to Eva. I would ask you to stick to the 5 minutes and then to have another 5 minutes for the debate between you. So I think that after Artur's presentation, it is clear that we have an overall target, economy-wide target. And this means that member states, sectors are going to be affected. And we have issues of distribution that were already mentioned, and also effectiveness. So there must be an interplay between all these sectoral policies, member state policies, which are in the framework of these European objectives and policies as well. So I would like you to comment a bit also from your experience on this interplay, and the importance of this sectoral and member state effectiveness and distributional issues.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me to this event and to this panel. As you mentioned, I am part of the negotiations in the Council as the representative of the Czech Republic, so one of the still 28 member states. But with my background, it's sometimes hard to imagine how difficult these negotiations are, because even studying European studies, you learn a lot about how it's supposed to work and how the institutions work and how the policies are made. But being there and sitting around the table with your colleagues and arguing about what is better for you and what is worse for them, it sometimes gets tough. So it really helps that we now have this framework of Paris Agreement. It really helps that the targets are set, the commitment is there, and this is what all of us signed up for. All the member states now know where they're going. So this really actually helps us in the discussion, because now we don't have to anymore argue about the commitment. We all signed up for at least 40%. This is there, and we have the goal, and now we just have to figure out the little tiny details, or who's going to do what. So that's what has been going on in the Council for the past 2 years already, on the part on the ETS that Artur talked about, and then for about a year on the non-ETS proposals. And I think when you look at the dynamics and the different member states' commitments and the sectors that you mentioned in your questions, it's very different in both of these negotiations, because I think in the ETS, in the emission trading, it helps us that this is a European market-based mechanisms. We have the cap. We know that the cap is going down. We can discuss how much down this is going, but we have to fit in within the cap, and it's based on the European system. So in that sense, there are not so many differences between member states' commitments, because there is one commitment, European one, on the ETS part, but there are more differences in the sectoral, because of course member states have different industries, they have different shares of emissions from industry or agriculture or buildings and stuff like that. So based on that, we're having more discussions on the sectors. On the other hand, in the non-ETS part, which is everything else, then the emission trading, everything else, then the industry and energy, we have member states' commitments. So we have to decide about who's doing what and about the targets for each and every member state. And the Commission made their proposal, so they're done with their work, even though, of course, they're very much part of the negotiations and very helpful. Thank you. But now it's about us and deciding what we do. And there, I think the good thing is that we have a target. Each of us, member states, have a target, but we are flexible about how we reach the target. So if I take the case of the Czech Republic, we have a lot of potential, for example, in buildings. We still have many non-renovated buildings. So for us, maybe we can have more programs and concentrate more on the buildings, because we know that's where we're going to gain a lot of emission reduction. For other member states, it might be transport or agriculture and stuff like that. So the flexibilities are there not only in what Artur was talking about within the system itself, that you can transfer, you can borrow, you can bank, you can play around between ETS and non-ETS a little bit with quite strict limits, the same with the LULUCF, so we still keep the environmental integrity of the whole system. But you can play around as a member state with how you are reaching your target. So I think that's important, especially when we're having the discussions between the member states, that it's up to us what we decide how we're gonna reach these targets. In the ETS, what is important when it comes to sectors are, especially for member states that are poorer, that have lower GDP, is the financial mechanism. And there is lots of support that was agreed already 2 years ago, and now we're implementing those. how to boost modernization of the energy sector, which, again, in the case of Czech Republic, there is a huge potential, and many other countries as well, how to improve energy efficiency. And we are getting funding for that through ETS financial mechanisms. So when we look at that, and I think we'll talk about that, the other speakers will talk about that later, and we can still discuss it. For us, it's also important that actually what we are getting from the ETS system is incentive to modernize, is incentive to actually invest in low carbon in investments and technologies. And therefore, it's important for us that we have a price of emission allowances that is actually credible and that helps us with these investments and with those changes that we are doing. So it depends for each and every member state. It depends for each and every sector because the challenges are different, but I think the goals are the same. And it's the same for member states that have their national strategies. Like we have a national strategy climate policy in the Czech Republic that deals with the framework of 2030, but also has a long-term vision. And I think that that's what will be important also on the EU level once we get to the whole governance debate. And I'm sure we will get to the more details later, but just to frame it in those 5 minutes. Thanks.
Thanks, Eva. Any reactions to Eva's words or any further point that the other panelists would like to raise here?
No, I totally agree with what you said. Just another dimension to add is that I think there is the one dimension is the distribution of costs within member state, where I think EU has done a lot in many aspects. You mentioned the flexibility, also the fact that the way the targets were defined, taking account of the wealth of the country. I think another dimension which is important is the distribution of costs within the member state and within the different groups, because climate policy will be expensive. We know these costs will be buried, so it's important that there's an equity on who bears the cost. I think probably here member state can do a lot of it. Most of it probably I think is a decision of the member state how they will implement the policy. And for example, part of the revenue of the EU ETS, I know they have this revenue of the EU ETS. I mean, part of that can also be used to try to make sure that the cost of climate policy are distributed, equally among the different consumer, among different also industry, among different players.
Thanks. Without taking away too much of the upcoming debate, I think I just wanted to add, member states have committed, the European Union has committed. It's only fair that the industry commits as well. So the power sector is fully committed, fully signed up. And there's a very steep decarbonization road that this sector has announced and is pledged to. And Artur was speaking about bridges between ETS and non-ETS. What we see as an additional bridge is, as we move forward with the decarbonization of the power sector, the energy carrier electricity becomes more and more sustainable. And in that way, we can switch fuels in those sectors that Eva was talking about, specifically transport and buildings, towards that at a gradual pace in order to not only reduce their emissions, but also increase their efficiency. So there is more than one bridge. This is an unofficial bridge in terms of energy carrier switching. So that is something that we think is also very relevant, not least also because when you switch, as we know, the ETS sector is a cap and trade system. Anything that would be consumed in electricity on the non-ETS sectors, if we switch more towards electromobility, those emissions that power those cars would then be brought under the ETS and under that cap. So you would have a synergy working there in the favor. And for the rest, I think I'll leave the debate for later.
That's fine.
Okay, so let's go for the second question. And the second question goes to Henning, and is related in part to what you have just said. And the first part would be, okay, how do we get cost effectiveness? And perhaps you want to discuss a bit on the type of policy mixes or best approaches here. But it seems also that the electricity sector is key in getting effectiveness, because at least with the state of the technologies that we have at the moment and the prospects, it seems that it is where it is easier to decarbonize and, as you said, to do things indirectly in other sectors. So I would like you to comment on the possibilities here, and also on how the state of this electricity sector in Europe, the current situation. We saw in Artur's presentation that this was also an important issue on market design, or on the coexistence of different regulations or policies. I mean, we're seeing that energy efficiency policies directly affect, and a lot, the electricity sector, and also renewable policies, of course. So I would like you to discuss a bit on whether this policy mix is synergetic, or there might be also some problems with it.
Okay, thanks very much. I didn't say it before, but also thank you very much for inviting me. Very interesting panel. So thanks for having me. Yes, you are fully correct. We have an overall system. We have targets in different areas. We have commitments. And all of this somehow has to fit together and make a holistic picture. I think I start with saying that, first of all, the power sector is fully on board with the goals that we're trying to achieve. We are fully committed to have a carbon neutral power generation by 2050. And that means for the sector, decarbonization by 80 to 95%. So this is a huge pledge. It is a huge challenge for the sector, but it is what we are looking to achieve. It is what we have committed ourselves to. And we have reiterated that pledge indirectly only last month, when our Secretary General has announced that Eurelectric's members from 2020 onwards will no longer invest in coal-fired power generation. So those are big commitments. Those are huge steps forward. We realize that the power sector is at the very center of achieving the European Union commitment to Paris and the European Union commitment to sustainability. And we want to lead and steer that transition. We want to be in the driving seat. Just to give you a number, last year on EU average, power generation was 56% carbon neutral already. 30% of that came from renewables. The rest came from nuclear sources. So we have a long way to go, but we've already come a long way as well. So we agree on the goals. We agree on the necessity to achieve them. The key question is, of course, do we agree on the puzzle pieces, and do we agree on the instruments in the past to make it happen? And I think I will just go bit by bit through the three main items. So greenhouse gases, renewables, energy efficiency, and see if we agree and whether that makes a holistic whole. On greenhouse gases, we are fully in line. As I said, we would like to have a 40% reduction target, at least 40% by 2030. And we would like to have that achieved in the way that makes it cost efficient, which to us is a strong European emissions trading scheme. We are strong proponents of having a market-based solution that is technology neutral, and that would be ideally a market that can drive the investments needed to get us where we want to be in time. If we wait too long, if we are too slow, we lose a lot of time, and we have to do more faster later, it will get more expensive. So that is one item. We hope that the current negotiations in the reform of the ETS, one of many reforms, is going to go into that direction. It will have a huge impact on how well we will perform also in the other areas. So that is absolutely crucial for us. And that is, for us, the ETS is the cornerstone to getting us to that decarbonization for the power sector. And the decarbonization of the power sector is then critical to have a reason to switch other sectors towards electricity. It doesn't make sense to move to electromobility if we cannot decarbonize the power sector, of course. So next item is renewables. And here I'm happy to say that Eurelectric is, or the European power sector, is also in line with what the Commission has proposed and what is being discussed right now, which means a 27% binding EU target under the condition that we go forward with the market integration. And this is what in the recent package that has been proposed has taken a really good step in the right direction, in our opinion. We see a lot more integration of renewables in the market. We see the right signals going forward. So we're very happy with what's being discussed there right now. Of course, there is always a devil in the details relating to what kind of obligations, what kind of demands we put on the suppliers of renewable electricity. But overall, we're going in the very right direction there. However, of course, and I will repeat this in a moment, it does have an impact on the ETS again. So that is one thing that needs to be managed. Then the second item, or the last item, is energy efficiency. And if anyone has been following the development of the European power sector over the last 10 to 15 years, you will not be surprised to see that the old business models are disappearing or they are changing. And we're moving towards a more service-orientated business model. A lot of our members, a lot of our the utilities that are our members are becoming energy efficiency service providers. They develop and they profit from the development of energy efficiency markets. So we are very much in favor of bringing forward energy efficiency. Also, of course, going forward and decarbonizing not only the power sector, but the other sectors as well, as you know, will not be possible without reducing the demand of the energy in these fields. So we have to do both at the same time. We have to reduce the demand of the energy that we do use, but at the same time, we need to make that energy that we're still going to use sustainable. And that we shouldn't mix up. If energy is sustainable, we should make sure that we don't waste it or that we don't save too much of it or spend a lot of money on saving sustainable energy, but we have to find the balance here. And this is also where energy efficiency legislation is key for us, because to us, as I said, we believe electricity to be, or carbon neutral electricity to be the energy carrier for the future. The vehicles to achieve this are very much within the world of energy efficiency, at least within European Union law. And this is why we have seen the Commission come forward with, in buildings directives, which is part of energy efficiency legislation, to propose that there could be electromobility charging stations. It's very important because without this, obviously, you will not see these kinds of transitions. Or we see that we have to make sure that we calculate the way how we save energy, what kind of energy we save at what time. This is also enabled and blocked through energy efficiency legislation, so it's important. And then, of course, there is always the question relating to the targets, and that puts the electricity sector between a rock and a hard place in a certain way. Because, like I said, we are very much in favor of going forward with energy efficiency and also electric solutions in the transport sector, EVs, or heat pumps in the power in the heat sector. They are more efficient, so we can be efficient there as well with this transition. But at the same time, increasing the target overall has again an impact on the ETS, and it's quite strong one, as you've said earlier as well. I believe it's over 35%, but just increasing the target 3% going forward from 27 to 30%. And that is something, this is probably, to bring it back together, this is where we see the room for improvement, or where we see really the concern for the power sector is these three targets, three different areas, while at the same time having chosen the vehicle to get us to carbon neutrality, we need to somehow manage it. We cannot avoid the policy overlaps, of course. We cannot turn away from energy efficiency or renewables, but their impact on the ETS is significant and it needs to be addressed and managed. And that is basically the main concern that we have, because on the Paris Agreement and Europe's contribution to that depends on a decarbonization of the power sector, and that has to be cost efficient. And this is a real headache. The Commission's doing great work on this. We're working together with them. And but overall, I mean, going forward with individual solutions in different sectors and different silos, the puzzle pieces are correct. But when we put them in place, we need to sometimes look back and see whether we're still putting a picture together or not. So this is where I would leave it for now. Thanks.
Artur, any reaction to?
I think maybe on that last point, the interactions between different policies, energy efficiency and also renewables, and not only that, also the link to what is happening if you suddenly face an economic crisis, or what happens if you have a large amount of credits coming into your market. I think that is what we have been seeing in Europe, that has been happening, and that has led to a big surplus. And I think the way we try to address that now is with managing the amounts that are in the market. So with the market stability reserve, we hopefully can address all these issues right away. So it's not specific on energy efficiency or specific for renewables, but it will also cater for a financial crisis that you could have in the future, or if kind of international credits would again come into the European market, which is not foreseen for the moment after 2020, then you have a tool that can really manage that.
Eva, Claudio, would you like?
Maybe on this, like on the overlaps, we definitely agree with the principles, because it is there. It creates problem for the ETS, and I think that once we have market stability reserve that will start functioning in 2019, we will be taking the huge oversupply from the market. We are also strengthening in this revision that we are now negotiating with, strengthening the MSR. We are dealing with the huge oversupply that will be actually managed in the that will be put into the MSR in the early 20s. So hopefully this will deal with the issue, but we do understand that this is a point, but it's quite a complex one. So I think MSR is the first step how to deal with it, and hopefully it will work. There was one point I wanted to agree that you said we need to move to new technology, and we have to start soon. For us, it's important to modernize soon and start with innovation projects soon. Definitely for many countries that have energy-intensive industries, it's important that energy sector is a low-carbon sector, because then it helps you. It helps you with the emissions in all the other industry sectors. So the sooner we start with the financial mechanisms and with the projects being implemented on the ground in the member states, the sooner we will see the results, and the bigger reduction we will see in the end. And hopefully in 2030, we will be overachieving our targets.
Of course, I agree with the other speakers that on one side, we need multiple policies. On the other side, when you put multiple policies, you have interaction problem, and this is and to find the balance is difficult, and probably it is a work in progress, in the sense that ex post experience show the ex post. I mean, you can do up to a certain point. But there should be some ex-ante adjustment, and I think the EU ETS is going this direction. I mean, we had the first package in 2009. We realized that there was some problem that at that time was probably people didn't think was so important, and now we try to adjust with this market stability reserve. And I think it's important to keep this empirical approach in the sense that. I think that the market stability reserve will help, but we don't know how much it will solve this problem, because it has to be proved. I mean, it has not started yet. And I think the Commission has already foreseen a revision after a few years of this learning by doing, in a sense that after a few years of the market stability reserve, we can see how much it helps or not. And based on that, we can try to adjust and move on and improve it.
Thanks, Claudio. Let's go now for the third question, and this is to Artur. I think one quite new element and different to what we had, a few years ago is the so-called energy union and the governance that is behind it. We even have a vice president for the energy union now in the Commission, and what I would like to know here is what is the role of this new governance? How does it fit in the Paris commitments of the EU? And what are the benefits of having this governance and kind of putting together a lot of reporting, assessments? What is the improvements we have with respect to a few years ago here?
Thank you. I think it's a good question, because it really starts from what Claudio was just saying, that you need to develop policies where you can be able to still learn and you can improve them over time. And I think that is the whole, the central objective of the governance system. That on one side, you strengthen the planning. You say, look, we have now these targets and member states are very free to choose what they can do in the different sectors. Still, in order to make it happen, there needs to be a dedicated policy also at member state level. So the governance has as a central plank a planning tool which says you need to plan climate and energy policies, and these need to be done hand in glove. It's not two separate pillars that one part of the administration can deal with climate and the other part can deal with energy, and then you hope that there will be a consistent policy outcome at the end of the day. No, what we would like to see, I think, at the EU level is a more consistent planning process. The second thing, of course, is, you rightly say, we have the international commitments, is the Paris Agreement. So you need to adapt that learning cycle to the Paris cycle. And that is what we try in the governance proposal. The big milestones in the Paris cycle is 2018 facilitative dialogue, 2020 when you come back, look at your NDCs, 2023 again the next stock take, 2025 you come to the next commitment. So how do you make sure that your domestic policy process is aligned with that? So what we have put in is, on one hand, that these planning and reporting processes are aligned with the Paris cycle, so that every time you go to a stock take, you really have the latest information on where do we stand on implementation in the EU. So in the year 2018, next year, and when we come to the facilitative dialogue, what the Commission is proposing is to say, by then member states should have made up their mind on how their national plans are going to look like. Because then if you add that up, you know, are you going to achieve what you have said or promised in the international context or not? Then you need to have a review at a certain point in time, and that is good to have it after the stock taking. That you say, okay, if you add up and also look around, not only in Europe, where are we together? Is there a need for our own legislation to adapt? So for the year 2024, for instance, we foresee a review and an evaluation of all the kind of the top layer of the climate policy. So that when we have to make a next round of commitments, for instance, in the year 2025, that we know, okay, what do we need to change and what are the implications for our national or our domestic legislation, which is for the European Union for a number of member states, of course. So in that way, we try to align this. And the same, I think, is also true for the mid-century strategy, which is so prominent in the Paris Agreement. So one of the articles in the governance proposal is to say it's also each member state who should look at the longer term and prepare a mid-century strategy, because there is subsidiarity in Europe. So also member states need to be actively thinking of what do I need to do? And we can do kind of one bottom up, but we can also look at it from an EU-wide level. And I think that will give sufficient information for policymakers in Europe to be able to make the right decisions in the year 2020, in the year 2025, when we talk about commitments. Do we need to up? Do we need to ratchet up? What can be done? How much is it going to cost us? What would be the implications? So in that way, we tried to align with the governance proposal also to the Paris cycle.
Henning, would you like to add anything on this?
Sorry. Thanks. Well, the governance is critical. We saw it already in the PowerPoint that Artur held earlier. Is especially in the fields for renewables, for energy efficiency, where you don't have the instruments that are that strict to enable member states to meet them, but at the same time to not give them too little flexibility to do this in a way that makes sense for them. finding the balance there is something that I don't envy the Commission for having to do. It's really difficult. What we believe within Eurelectric is, I mentioned it as the key problem we see within the interplay is the overlap. We think that the governance could be one of the instruments where this could be addressed, where there could be ways to manage it and to enable the flexibilities between member states. We think that within the governance there is a great room also to include or increase regional cooperation between different member states. We move forward there. We see a lot of challenges relating to the necessary investments to get us where we want to go. Bundling up member states, increasing their cooperation for those financing measures, these kinds of items. If we can move the governance and make it deliver on these kinds of potentials, it would be really helpful.
Yeah, this governance is one of the new things of the energy union, because till now we had either binding target at EU level with an EU instrument like the EU ETS, or we had binding target that were broken down at the national level, so practically were national target, where practically each country could free to choose, the policy to do it. So in this case, we have a binding target, which is at EU level, so it's not broken down, but it's binding. So, and the process has, to me, many similarities with the Paris Agreement, because they have the member state propose, and if in case it's not enough, the Commission has to find a balance or push the member state to do more. I think there are surely positive aspects on this. First is that there is much more coordination in doing it, so the member state has to take in account what the other do, while before, or when you have single target, each member state makes its own policy. We know there are problems, for example, on competition, on other things. So this can be, and so the policy, the overall policy should be more coordinated. It's very good. And of course, how it will work is challenging. It depends, of course, on the goodwill of the member state. And I think also the Commission has a big role, and as Henning said, a difficult role on try to really strike the right balance to fight the right compromise that can make practically everyone happy and that the target can be met.
Yeah, maybe yes. For the member state, I skipped working party on governance for this event in Bonn, so I'm very happy to be here and not discussing with our energy colleagues the governance proposal. But yeah, Commission is very nice in trying to get us organized at home. For some member states, of course, it's quite easy because they have one ministry that deals with energy climate. For many others, this is not the case. So in that respect, it definitely makes sense that we talk to each other. I think for our part, for the climate part, we're used to having this because we have international commitments, we have strong MRV system, and definitely there needs to be synergy with the Paris Agreement cycle. What I think will be more complicated, and you mentioned it, Henning, it's the part for the renewables and energy efficiency, where I could see that there are some aspects of the Commission proposal where member states are having troubles, and that will be, I think, important to come to solutions quite early, because we are on track with other legislative proposals. We're moving forward. We're moving forward with implementing Paris. So it's important that we move on governance as well. But I think in that energy part, it won't be very so smooth as is in the climate, I guess.
Thanks. And now, last question for Claudio. And this is related to innovation and to green growth and to new jobs. We may have a short-term target, and we may want to stress cost effectiveness to achieve it. But of course, we have long-term targets, and innovation, new technologies, new investments are really necessary. And this may also be good for the economy. So what's your opinion on the role of European climate and energy policies to achieve this innovation, and in particular of the EU ETS?
I think we all agree that innovation is crucial, that we need a lot of investment in R&D, pilot project, and so on. I mean, still, we have moved a lot, but still there's a lot of technology that need to be developed in order to achieve the 80% reduction. Now, here there are many policies that we can do both at EU level and national level. I think there's no single policy that solve everything, so probably we need a package, as we have actually. And I want to highlight that I think which are the two key policies for innovation that that must be in this package. The first one is a carbon price, and as the EU ETS is. That's because the carbon price is not only the most efficient way to reduce emission, but also stimulate the private sector to innovate and to invest in new technology. And we need the private sector. The public sector cannot do everything. And regarding the EU ETS, there are empirical evidence that the EU ETS has increased innovation. So there was a famous study that looked at the number of patenting in low carbon technology. Was found that when the EU ETS, with the beginning of the EU ETS, there was an increase of patenting in low carbon technology. Of course, the carbon price works if the carbon price is enough high and if enough stable. So if the private sector is sure that in the next years, in the long, as Xavier said, in the long run there will be a carbon price on here. I think the effort that the EU is making in order to make the ETS stronger and more stable, it is important. Another good aspect of a carbon price is that you have revenue, you raise revenue, and this revenue can be used, can be reinvested in innovation. So the ETS has already has this, and now that's the NER 300. I mean, has already part of it are for innovation, and also the member states are invited. I mean, they are not bound to do it, but they should make an effort in order to invest part of the revenue for innovation. I think this is important. Probably it's really important that it's monitored, that they how they spend this money. So this is the first policy. The second policy is funds for R&D, because we still need R&D. We don't have all the technology now to do it. In some sector we have a lot of technology. I mean, like, for example, on the power sector, but other sectors, especially on the industrial sector or in agriculture, for process emission, there's still technology. I mean, in some sectors, not enough technology available. Some sector there is, but it's very expensive. So we really need a lot to invest in R&D, not only, and also very basic R&D, like, for example, R&D for new materials. And here we need both private money and public money. Private money, I already said before that the carbon price is a way to stimulate them, and also probably it's good to create a good framework that the private sector can easily put money on R&D. But also here, I think there is room for, it's important to have also public money, because especially for the basic R&D, because there is what is called, in economic terms, knowledge spillover. So the private sector don't invest enough in R&D because they don't get all the benefits. So you invest in R&D, but you can patent something, but not everything. And what you spend practically goes also to other company, the benefit that they have not invested your money. So here I think there's still room for R&D. The EU, also here, the EU I think has done a lot. I mean, for example, there is the Horizon 2020, there is a budget of 80 million for R&D, and of this, about 30% are for climate purpose. I think it's important these money are spent efficiently, so really on projects that are needed, that are monitored. Probably, I think there's the member state, maybe some of them can do more. I think until now, the effort on the member state was more on policy for, not so much for developing new technology, but for applying new technology. So like all the policy on renewables, that's because there was a renewable target that was discussed before. I think now that the cost of renewable are going down, that the renewable are getting very close to be competitive, I think it's a matter of rebalancing and shifting money less from deployment and more for R&D. Well, until now, I think the ratio was like order of magnitude of between the money spent for R&D versus the money spent for deployment. And there, I think, I mean, there's space the space where money can be found for R&D. Okay.
Gladly. Claudio did a really good job in laying out exactly what the ETS can do and what it can't do, and that's exactly what I would answer here is, you can of course have discussions on what ETS should do and what it shouldn't do. You're completely correct that it can drive innovation on the supply side within the ETS sector in bringing the ETS sectors towards smarter technologies. Whether the investment then happens is another story. But where it can't help much is on the demand side. It cannot do as much there because you see that unless you refuel in a smart way, and most member states, I assume, don't, because I'm not an expert in exactly where the money goes for the revenues in terms of innovation. But on the demand side, you really need to have proper financing, proper innovation money going into the right ways. And we see there where we cooperate, where our members get involved in these items, you see that there is often a big barrier between moving smart technologies from the lab onto the market. And this is really where it hampers. And if you manage to have an innovation policy that can overcome this gap, this particular gap from getting it from a first tryout to market readiness, this is where you could have a lot, because there's a lot of interesting products there. There's a lot of interesting technologies that could change the world, could change the market, and they get stuck in that period of in between. So if we fuel the money properly to overcome this gap, I think that we can achieve a lot.
Yeah, I think this was very well made points, and I hope what we can do in the current negotiations is really ensure that we will be able to generate those finances, because in the system it's there. We have mechanisms how to support innovation. So what we can do, I think, from our part, is to make sure that the ETS will be stable and it will actually come up with a price that supports investment. And when it comes to innovation, I think there is a gap. I think we were actually, and we are lagging behind, not just the EU, the Czech Republic as well. When we look at the funds that are available and the funds that were available in their 300 program, we did not have one single project there. So I think there is a huge potential, but in many member states, we just haven't learned how to really fulfill it.
Artur.
Maybe just a few words is kind of in terms of the philosophy we are following on innovation is, on one hand, yes, to say we want to get things out of the lab into the practice. So that moment when you have to come up with the first big demonstration, the first of a kind project, that was the target of the NER 300. And that was very important. But then in other areas, we also see that we need to support deployment. And that, for instance, is in the area of energy efficiency. And that is another initiative we were doing, is renovation of houses sometimes is being portrayed as, oh, there's money lying on the street. Why are you not picking up the dollars that are lying on the street? It's a little more complicated, the story. Many of the banks, they know how to finance a house, but how to finance energy efficiency is for them, for many banks, is a completely new thing. So therefore, through our life funds, for instance, we have been supporting that in particular. And I'm happy to say the first taker on this program was a Czech bank. So that is helping small and medium-sized enterprises to make exactly these energy efficiency improvements, which will help to reduce the energy bill of these companies. And the same is true, I think, for households. So one needs to target these things, and one needs to make sure that you spend as little public money as that is necessary. And that is an art in itself, I must admit.
Okay, so now we have time for some questions from the public. So, yeah, Xavier.
I have two, tricky and nasty. You can pick which one is which. So I'm Jouni Keronen, head of the Climate Leadership Council Finland. Worked 24 years in Fortum, knowing these things also quite well. Now I have the easier question first. With these consumer actions that winter package also very nicely takes to the frame, that actually in Finland we evaluated that 68% of our national carbon footprint is coming from household selections, household consumption. That was done 10 years ago. Now they did again 10 things what the customers can do: electric vehicles, LED lights, solar panels and such, geothermal heat pumps. So then about half of those happen to be under ETS. And when I presented that to our environmental minister, that actually we could reduce 1/3 of the national target by 2030 by these consumer actions. Oh, oops, half of them are under ETS. So no actually emission reductions within European system. So this is one question, that is, would there be option, because the consumer's role will become bigger, somehow to take away allowances from the market to encourage also consumers to do it more, because these denialists, I have a lot of comments that this doesn't matter what I do, because it will not decrease the allowances. And then the second question was this, that there has been 2 interesting papers published this spring, the one by Rockström and Snellhuber of this carbon law. I don't know, have you seen it, but they conclude that our carbon budget, the target is that if we want to have 66% probability to stay below 2 and 50% probability to stay 1.5. So the available carbon budget after 2017 is 700 gigatons. Then 1 month later came the OECD and IRENA paper, and they say that it's about 800 gigatons. But if it's around that range, we will basically eat the carbon budget in 14-15 years globally. So therefore, my question was that what do you think about this, and what could be then the time schedule to upgrade the targets?
Okay, more questions, just to know how many people would like to intervene. One more. Perhaps in the meantime, we try to answer this one. And then, so Artur, would you like to start, or?
Yes. I'm not saying whether I start with the nasty one or the other one. I think on this issue, that if you reduce or if you improve efficiency, which then in turn reduces the emissions in the ETS, that is exactly what we try to address through the Market Stability Reserve. That if you observe major progress on the energy efficiency side that has repercussions on the ETS market, that you feed less allowances into the ETS market. So it's not about just taking allowances away from somebody who has bought them already, but reduce the feed-in rate into that in order to make sure that you're not having a negative impact on the carbon price at the end of the day. In terms of the carbon budget, indeed, the question what a 1.5 degrees Celsius objective would mean for the European economy is something we haven't looked into so far. If you look at in 2011, we did the 2050 carbon roadmap. The assumption there was that we need to get well beyond or below 2 degrees Celsius. And we looked at what are the technologies that you need to roll out in order to get there. And we all know that going down to 1.5 degrees is much harder. And that is an exercise we are embarking on in the coming months. And we will do that together with industry. We will do that with all other stakeholders and also academia to see what are the real implications there. And there are some very hard questions related to that. And I think it's not yet resolved whether we will be able to answer those questions. And also some of the answers might be nasty to the consumers and to the ones who elect the politicians. So I think that is a debate that we need to have, and we need to give ourselves sufficient time for this debate. I don't think that you can do that even between midday and midnight. That is not going to work. I think that will require a deep debate where you have good engagement of all parts of society in that discussion. And I think that's also something the Paris Agreement is demanding, that the non-government, or not only the non-governmental, but also the non-state actors, everybody needs to participate in that in order to have sufficient power behind and to be able to make maybe the hard decisions that will have to be taken in the coming years.
Anyone from the panel like to add? No. Okay, so let's go for the next question.
Yeah, thank you very much to the panel for the very interesting presentations. So we talked a lot about energy, but we briefly touched agriculture. So my question would be in regard to that. And it would be, how is the EU going to ensure that parts of its emissions reduction isn't carried out on the back of other people or countries? Because there's no point in outsourcing emission-intensive sectors like agriculture to countries outside the EU and celebrate that we achieved like emission reduction. And maybe background of this question is that the EU is having like virtual agricultural land. Like 1/3 of the EU agricultural land is virtual outside of the EU.
Okay, I'll bring to the picture the one player that Mr. Keronen already mentioned, that is the citizen. So, as you heard, some 70% of Finnish emissions, they are related to consumer choices. So, due to this information, we have launched something called Citizens Climate Pledge, for citizens to commit to a project that if they have an opportunity, they promise to cut their personal carbon footprint by half within 10 years. So this is just for all the people in this conference, I would say, that we have now made this a kind of a joint project with UNFCCC. We are planning to make this a global prototype, which could be considered in any country in any language, and this is something that I think that all the countries should consider. Please, you just Google Citizens Climate Pledge, and you get more information. You get linked to a kind of counter which helps citizens to calculate what they can do in their lives. That would create a lot of pressures also for companies to strive for this kind of product to produce and sell, produce and develop such products and services which would then preferred by more clever, wiser consumers.
Okay, I have time for another question. Well, let's try to do the two questions, yeah, very quickly.
Thank you also from me for very interesting presentations. I have a question for Mr. Henning Heder. You said that it's the forecast that there will be a lot of investments in renewable energies now, and from 2020, no more in coal-fired power plants. And I remember some years ago it was a forecast of IEA how much power industry will invest in, I don't know, in 20, 30 years. And it's a danger to lock in if there are no decisions regarding these emissions. So you say for Europe, it's looks very good in this respect. Is it something fixed, decided that it will be so, as you said, or is it partly a wish? And how does it look like globally, if you can maybe comment? Thank you.
Now the last one.
Hi, does it work? Yeah. I'm David Chan from Swiss Youth for Climate, and I have another question for Mr. Henning Heder. Sorry for that. Regarding the electric markets that is to be integrated, is there a plan to tackle the issue related to the irregularity and unpredictability of renewable power production?
Okay, so I think there are a couple of questions to you and also one to you. So perhaps can we start with you and then leave?
Sure, thanks very much. I think the question on the markets is not only for me. I think the others will have to say something on that as well. Essentially, yes, we are looking to have, it's a bit of an answer to both sides. With a 27% EU pledge for renewables in 2030, we are going to see a renewable penetration in the power system of about 45 to 50%. Currently, where we are is, as I said, around 30%. And the tricky part is that these 30% include the non-intermittent renewables, the hydropower, the predictable and the controllable ones, or the easier controllable ones. So that means until this point, we've made it with more and more, or more or less controllable renewables. Going forward, beyond of what we currently see, the powers will be almost exclusively intermittent and somewhat unpredictable. We're getting better at that, but it's still a challenge, of course. So yes, there is going to be a massively increasing part of power generation that will come from these sources. We are seeing a more and more conversion of the close to real-time trading between energy and electricity within the European countries. We see that more and more markets get coupled, and at the same time, we're working hard to have the interconnections and the infrastructure in order to buffer even further. So we are going a slow pace there. The infrastructure is going a bit slower than necessary. But in terms of the markets and in terms of real-time trading, or going close to real-time trading, I think we're making good progresses. The challenges will be bigger and bigger going forward. I don't want to predict whether it's going to be adequate or whether we're going to see more and more trouble, but I think that we are on the right track there. I'm sure Artur will have a thing or two to say on that as well. And then to the other question is, yes, the investments towards getting the power sector where we want to be are going to be immense, which is why I made the very strong call to have a instrument that allows these investments and puts them forward, not later, not in 10 years, but now. Because essentially, if we want to get from point A to point B, it's really not practical if we crawl for the first half and then we have to run and sprint for the second half. So we would like to have the investments now, and that is the trick. Is it a wish or is it a pledge from the power sector? I can say clearly, in 2009, 51 CEOs representing, I think, more than 70 or 80% of the power generation sector in all the large European utilities pledged to have a carbon neutral power sector by 2050, which translates into 80 to 95%. And last month, we made get the word straight, an announcement to not intend to invest in new coal power plants after 2020. And to be very fair, this was supported by almost all Eurelectric members. So we do represent the entire European Union with our members, and plus the EEA area. But we did not have on board our Greek and our Polish colleagues because for many different reasons, of course, they are in different starting positions. They face different challenges. They have committed in the overall framework. They cannot commit right now regarding that coal pledge, but they are committed in the overall one, and they will follow suit as it makes environmentally and economically sense for them, of course. They will get there at their own pace.
First question on agriculture. And I think what you're referring to is how do we avoid creating carbon leakage, that we put additional constraints on our agriculture production in Europe, which would mean it becomes more competitive in other parts of the world, and then production would move, including all the greenhouse gas emissions with that. And it's true, if you look at some of the analysis that has been done by our colleagues from the Joint Research Center in CV, if you put very harsh conditions on agriculture and say you must reduce and you have to do that in each part of Europe, then indeed you could have drastic effects on production. For instance, the production of meat in Europe, and it would mean, okay, emissions would go down, but on the other hand, emissions would probably go up somewhere else where the meat is going to be produced. So one has to be extremely cautious with that, and it's certainly one of the principles of EU climate policy that we do not want to cause just the relocation of emissions, because that is a completely ineffective policy, and that is a kind of a challenge we already face with the industrial sectors under the ETS. And I believe that we have been dealing with that in a clever way, and in the same way we'll have to deal with that in agriculture. So one of the consequences of that is that you don't see a hard target being put on the agricultural sector or particular type of emissions across the board. So no command and control in terms of these emissions that go down to the level of the farm. But it's packaged in the wider non-ETS sector, where at the end of the day, its member states have the choice. Okay, am I going to do the reductions in the buildings, or am I going to do that somewhere else? And we have created that new flexibility that, okay, you can improve, for instance, your soil conditions, increase the carbon content of that, and that is going to be counted towards what you should be contributing. So in that way, we are treading carefully with the agricultural sector in that respect. And I think there is a lot of work that we still have to do in the coming years, because what you will see happening in Europe is, and you look at the 2011-2050 carbon roadmap, it shows very clearly that in the year 1990, agriculture non-CO2 emissions were 10% of the total EU emissions. In the year 2050, because we decarbonize the energy sector, you have those emissions standing at 1/3 of the total emissions in the EU. So the limelight is going more and more towards agriculture over time. But there is solutions that still need to be found. And we need also a lot more investment in research in those areas. The citizens, yeah, I'm 100% with you. These are very important initiatives, and that is going to buy you the support in the wider population, that you can see things are really working. And I think it's going to be the introduction into the debate on behavioral change. Do we need to change our lifestyles in one way or the other? Which does not necessarily mean we don't go on holidays any longer, but we go on holidays in a different way. It might not mean I'm forced to give up meat, but it might also mean, okay, I might look at my diet in a different way, in a more holistic way, also looking at the health benefits of the diet, which is, I think, quite important when you look at meat consumption. So this is something that will help in this whole discussion. So it's very worthwhile. From our end, we are supporting a number of those initiatives through our LIFE program in Europe. We also help at the level of the municipalities. We have the Covenant of Mayors that helps in bringing these ideas forward, very close to the citizens to take matters forward. Last point was on the electricity sector. I think I have little to add to what Henning was saying. Of course, there is irregularity, you called it. There is unpredictability. But a lot in this world is unpredictable. Whether it's going to rain when I step outside this house is something, okay, I can now watch at my Google app and see what is the percentage. Still, there is a certain level of unpredictability. But you can prepare for that. And you can use market forces for that. And that is what we probably have not been doing in Europe in the power sector to a large extent. If you look back at what was the structure and the model of the power sector over the last decades in Europe and probably everywhere else in the world, was the promise that at any point in time, you must generate sufficient power to cover. But the flexibility that you have also to shift demand over the daytime was not really used. So to mobilize that requires price signals. And therefore, this intraday market price signals are going to be eminently important to really capture that potential that is there. And if you believe some of the modelers, that is a huge potential. And that is probably also one of the reasons of what we see. We are at the beginning of this massive transition of the power sector, there is a lot of overcapacity in the electricity system in Europe, and many of the big companies, they are retiring plants, kind of putting them out of production for a while because the demand is no longer there, because we are starting to manage demand and supply in the power sector much better. And if we let market forces work, that means give the price signal and make it attractive for somebody to deal with unpredictability so that it becomes a business model, then you can move forward. And I think that is a central element in the market design proposal of the Commission. But of course, the proposal in itself raises a lot of anxieties, I can tell you, because it's a different model on which this world is going to build, and it's different from the past where it was working. And people talking about blackouts, you had the discussion in January this year in terms of the situation in France and so on. People are saying, or many analysts are saying, oh, you will have those situations much more in the future. So let's get prepared. Let's the price signal work so that private sector can provide solutions. And there are many who are ready with the solutions.
Thanks, Artur. Before the refreshments, which are waiting for us, apologies for not handling properly this because it's almost 8:10. Let me wrap up as indicated in the program. I think we started asking where do we stand, and it is clear that we have strong objectives, difficult objectives in the long term, and we have a complex policy situation with many instruments, sophisticated instruments, but that also interact between them. And we need a process of learning by doing, and we are actually learning a lot by doing, and this can be also of use elsewhere outside Europe. We also mentioned the energy union as a governance kind of a new thing, and I think this was quite important in the discussions. And finally, we talked about innovation and how innovation was so relevant for achieving the objectives. Let me say that in all these issues, learning by doing, energy union, innovation, the role of researchers is very important. I'm a researcher myself, and let me say this, but not only researchers, generally, all the stakeholders are, of course, must play a big role, and citizens, and they are the center, as you said. So thanks a lot to the panelists. I think it was, and to Artur, the keynote speaker, I think it was very, very interesting, and we covered many things. So let's go now for the refreshments.
Hey.